Hello and welcome to Chapter 4. Okay, let's talk about ethics and social responsibility. The chapter title says doing well but doing good. Kind of emphasizes the fact that companies who act in an ethical way and who tend to be socially responsible long term tend to do better than companies who do not. So I wanted to kind of start framing this chapter in that way, but also to try to get you to understand that I think we all try to be good people. We all want to do the right thing. We want to help other people. So it's not just about doing well because you're doing good. It's deciding what kind of business professional you want to be. So some of the things I want you to think about as we go through this chapter. I would also ask you to think about how you would define ethics to begin with. What is ethics? Most of the answers that I get from students essentially says, what you think is right or wrong. And I would agree with that, right? Deciding what's right, good, bad. But the problem with that is, and I agree with that definition, it is essentially correct. But does everybody think about right and wrong the same way? In other words, if something might be A-okay for me, it might not be for you. So all people are different. We all have different perspectives. We were all raised a little bit differently, maybe in a different culture, different environment. So how do we start to make sense of these things? So case in point, let me give you a couple of quick scenarios. One of the things I ask my students during class as we start this chapter is I give them a couple of scenarios. So here's the first one. You see your friend's girlfriend or boyfriend out on a date with someone else. In other words, your friend's boyfriend or girlfriend is cheating on them. Do you tell your friend, or you just think, well, it's not my business. I'm not going to get involved. Usually, it surprises me. Sometimes the whole class is slanted one direction or the other. Sometimes it's kind of a 50-50 slant. It's a good example, though, of how different people think of things differently. Next question or scenario I typically give is, if you're a recruiter working for a company, or better yet, let's say that you are a business owner. You own a business. Maybe business is starting to take off. You're really shorthanded. You really desperately need help. You are so stressed out. You're about to pop. You need somebody immediately. So you open up a job. You interview a bunch of people for it. And head and shoulders, there's two candidates that stand out. One is definitely better than the second choice. It's a female. She's definitely a little bit better than the other candidate. The other candidate's pretty good, but she's definitely better. But she comes in for the interview and she is 8 or 9 months pregnant. Do you go ahead and hire that woman, knowing full well that in a month or so, she's going to take 6 or 8 weeks off for maternity leave, and you desperately need the help now? What do you do? Do you hire her, or, sorry, go with the second choice? I am usually shocked at the results, because usually, overwhelmingly, my students tell me, even the female students say, sorry, lady, I'm going to hire the second choice. Well, is that right? Is that wrong? That's actually something that you have to start deciding things like that. I will tell you, by the way, that research tells us that when businesses go out of their way to provide some flexibility for working mothers, for example, it typically comes back to them with very high loyalty from that employee, which translates into better service for that company's customers, better productivity by that, employee, and those employees typically stay with the company longer. So just throwing that out. All right, let's dig into the chapter. All right, so we're talking about ethics. We'll define it. We'll also talk about, kind of frame it in terms of universally accepted ethical standards that like everyone mostly agrees on, as a good place to start thinking about it. We'll talk about some ethical dilemmas. We'll talk about ethics not only as related to the individual, but to the whole company. Talk about social responsibility, how that fits into the more global part of business. And we'll talk about how you evaluate. How do you know if you are being socially responsible or not as a company? How do you know if you're doing it well? All right. So ethics. We kind of already established, right? A set of beliefs about what is right and what is wrong. And of course, when we assign that to, apply that to a business situation, that is the application of that same thing to business. We'll talk a little bit about ethical standards, some more on the next slide. But ethical dilemmas aren't just something that you hear about on the news. You will be faced with ethical dilemmas all the time in the business world. Now, it might not be something huge, but a lot of little ethical dilemmas will come your way, and you have to start deciding now what kind of a business professional you want to be. How ethical do you want to be? What kind of a person do you want to be? So these are some things that I would urge you to start thinking about. All right. One of the things, some of the ethical dilemmas that happen a lot of times tend to result from a violation of the organization's values. Now, in a lot of organizations, in case you don't know, they'll take a lot of time during their strategic planning process, and they'll define an organizational vision statement, an organizational mission statement, and they will define their organizational values. Like, what do we value as a company or as an organization? For this to be useful, by the way, it has to be something that is emphasized and trained and evaluated on a continual basis. For example, in the Army, I'm a retired military officer. I was in the Army for a number of years, and these are the Army values: loyalty, duty, respect, self-service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. We took these things very seriously. We had some very specific definitions for these things. It was trained into us starting in basic training, and then every other military course that we take, these things are covered. We actually evaluate our soldiers based on these values. We write up our soldiers when they act up. And one of the things we write into the verbiage is, how they violated one of those Army values, one or more of those Army values. So a lot of ethical dilemmas really come down to violating ideas, values, beliefs that are tightly held by the organization. And it's not always the lower level people. A lot of times it is the highest level people in the organization. So let's talk a little bit about the law. So one of the things I would put in my notes, by the way, right now, is the fact that a really good place to start in your decision-making process about whether something is ethical or not is to ask yourself, is it legal? If it is illegal, chances are it is also unethical. Say that again. If it is illegal, the chances are, most likely, it is also unethical. That is a great place to start. Okay? But just because something is legal doesn't necessarily mean it is ethical. Okay? Here's what I mean by that. So, for example, promoting high-calorie, low, unhealthy food without giving adequate information about the risks. Now, I think in today we have an information age, right? If you don't know that fast food, for example, is bad for you, then I question your sanity. You probably That's probably the least of your worries if you don't know things like that. So I'm not. I think people could argue, well, look, if you don't know that unhealthy food is unhealthy for you, then that's too bad. The company's not selling anything that's illegal, so if you eat it, that's on you. Well, okay, but everything isn't so cut and dried, right? For example, some people give McDonald's a hard time because they do a lot of their marketing is towards kids, or at least it used to be, right? They promote the toys that are available in the Happy Meals. They promote the characters. They promote the playground that's at a lot of the restaurants, and the kids would in turn, beg and whine to the parents until their parents gave in and they take them. Some people thought that was unethical. You're marketing something unhealthy to children. Well, there's nothing illegal about marketing to children, for example. But is it ethical? I'm not sure. I'm not saying whether it is or it isn't. But it could be a dilemma, and it's a dilemma for some people very strongly. How about producing products you know will break before their time? I think we could all agree that technically is legal, and the market will definitely correct for that. In other words, the word will get out. People will probably stop buying your products. But is it unethical? Well, it's not illegal, but I think we could all agree it is illegal. Case in point. And by the way, there is a term for producing products you know will break before their time. It is called planned obsolescence. Don't miss that on the test. All right. So, as an example of this, Apple has been accused, and I believe there are some lawsuits currently going on. They've been accused of throttling back the performance of some of the older iPhones with software updates so that people will be more inclined to buy the new ones. Now, I don't know if that's true. I have no idea. In fact, I hope my brother isn't watching this because he works at Apple and he bleeds Apple. But if that were the case, if that is true, I think we could probably all agree that sure, that's legal, but that sounds pretty unethical. How about paying non-living wages to workers in developing countries? Now, this is a good example of an ethical dilemma that is not as cut and dried as you might think. Now, reading it right off the bat, a knee-jerk reaction might be, well, absolutely that's unethical. Let's think about that for a second. First of all, how do you define non-living wage? For example, we see protests here in the United States from McDonald's workers in some cities that say, we want $15 an hour. Well, I would back that truck up just a minute and first start asking some questions. First of all, what is a living wage for a fast food job? Is a fast food job designed to support a family of 5? I think most people would say no. Those are jobs for teenagers that you have for a year or two and you quit as you get more educated and skilled in some sort of job, trade, or something, and you move on. It's not for people to support an entire family with it. So you might ask the question, okay, well, what if you force all companies to pay a living wage? What is that? What is that number? $15 an hour. Okay. So what does a company do? What happens when you raise the minimum wage? And believe me, I am not arguing either side of this argument. I'm just trying to get you to think critically. When you raise the living wage or the minimum wage, let's say that we did raise it to $15 an hour. What's going to happen? First of all, what's going to happen to prices? You think that McDonald's, let's use McDonald's as the example. Do you think McDonald's is going to raise the price of their food? Yes. Who eats fast food the most? Poor people. Okay. Are they going to hire more people or less people? Less people. Who wants those unskilled jobs the most, or needs those jobs the most? Who are those available to the most? Uneducated, poor people, right? Like teenagers. Okay, so you're also hurting them in that way. Let's see, what else is going to happen? Are they going to hire they're going to use automation. In other words, they're going to hire less people. They're going to work their current staff harder. They're also going to get pickier about who they hire. They have to pay $15 an hour now. They're going to be pickier about who they hire. They're going to require people to have more education and more experience before they're hiring. Again, who's that hurt? Hurts the unskilled, uneducated, poor people. So, it sounds good on one hand to say, well, we should pay everybody a living wage. I would ask those people, well, why don't we just make it $1,000 per hour? And they say, well, that's crazy. That would hurt businesses, and that would raise prices, and that would hurt yeah. So think critically about these things. They're not always as cut and dried as you think. Another example on this same topic. A few years ago, an article came out in Rolling Stone magazine about Nike. And there were pictures in this article. It was about how Nike ran sweatshops in these third world countries. They showed these very dramatic photos of these very cute young kids. Well, they're not super young, but like teenagers behind sewing machines, and you could see that they were sweaty, and you could see the jungle behind them. So that obviously wasn't, the doors of the plant were open because there was no air conditioning in there. They mentioned that they only got paid like the equivalent, I don't remember what the number was, like the equivalent of like $5 a day for working there. And people were outraged. I mean, people just lost their minds, and Nike actually took a sales hit for a little while over it. People were like, oh, I'm not doing business with that company. They are completely unethical. Well, just let's play devil's advocate for a second. What that article did not say is that $5 a day salary or wage was the going rate in that country. It was the average salary. So for them, it was a living wage. It also didn't point out the fact that those people who were working without air conditioning in that building, that was the way manufacturing worked most in the country. And none of those people had air conditioning in their homes. So it wasn't really they didn't consider it a bad working environment at all. In fact, there were some interviews that came out after the big public outcry with some of those factory workers there, and they said that they were very grateful for the job and were treated very well, and they didn't think badly of their employer whatsoever. So again, I am not saying that you shouldn't, there's also research while we're on the subject that says when you pay your employees higher than market rates and you treat them better than you have to, treat them very well, treat them with respect, you pay them well, you treat them well, you give them a say in their work, you provide good benefits, this and that. There's also a lot of research that says that those people tend to have higher levels of loyalty, stay longer, work harder, treat your customers better, and therefore it's good for the bottom line. So I want to balance out what I just told you. So in any case, I want you to think about these things critically. All right, let's move to the other side. So legal and ethical, producing high quality goods. I think we can all agree that you should be producing a high quality product for your customers, at least the highest quality you can at the price point that you're offering that product for. Reward integrity, we all agree that's ethical. Leading by examples, a big one. I want you to start thinking about what kind of leader you want to be. And believe me, when you become a manager, your people watch you and are influenced by your actions a lot more than you probably will realize. Okay? So be very cognizant of that. And by the way, you do not have to be a manager. You don't have to be in charge in order to influence others in a positive way. Okay? So if you are highly ethical and you're known as a good, trustworthy, moral, and ethical person, chances are it's a good example for everyone that works around you, even for your boss. They can be influenced by you. So again, something to keep in mind. Treating employees fairly, in other words, applying rules the same to everyone. not just to your coworkers who you're not friends with. Letting your friends kind of slide. I think we could all agree that would be unethical. And more and more contributing to the community, more and more businesses are expected by the public to give back. And I think that's a very good trend. We should be helping one another. Business is no different than any individual. Businesses should be trying to give back to the community. Now, not all business. A lot of businesses are just keeping their heads above water. This does not mean that they have to donate large sums of money. It means to give back in some way, even small ways that they can afford to. Not everything costs money to do. For example, I worked at a company a few years back, and every other Thursday, or no, maybe it was once a month. Yeah, it was one. I think it was like the last Thursday of the month or something like that. Anyone who in the company who worked at our central office that wanted to could sign up to go volunteer at the food pantry, the local food pantry. You could leave an hour early from work, and we'd all meet there as a group and work together for like 2 or 3 hours. And it was a blast. And that didn't cost the company any money. I mean, I guess it could. You think of it, they gave everybody 1 hour off. But, at the end of the day, on a Thursday, and I think it definitely probably came back to the company in increased productivity, because we got to know each other so much better, regardless of our rank within the company. We got to know each other. It built kind of a camaraderie between all of us, and it was actually easier to work with people, when you get to know them. So, again, I think we'd all agree that's legal and very ethical. And then, of course, respecting the environment. Now, we can disagree about, exactly what that means, but I think, as a rule, we all agree that that is both legal and is ethical. All right, how about embezzling money? I think we can all agree that embezzling money, by the way, if you don't know what embezzling means, that's okay. Essentially, it means stealing company money. I worked at a company, my first job out of college, I was an entry-level financial analyst. At that company, there was a lady who'd been working for the company for like 30 years. She was like a grandmother to everybody. We all loved her. She was out on sick leave for several weeks. We had a temp filling in for her. Long story short, the temp figured out that she had been embezzling money for years, to the tune of several $100,000. So, yeah, you never know. But yes, embezzling, I think we can all agree, is not only stealing is illegal, and she did go to jail, by the way, but it is also certainly unethical. Engaging in sexual harassment, I think we can all agree on that. Practicing collusion with competitors is your next buzzword for the day. Collusion with competitors. What we mean there is, like, if you owned a business here in Waco, Texas, maybe there was you and 3 competitors, and you all kind of owned the market space for your particular type of product or service. And let's say that there was a new competitor, big competitor, moving into town. And if you were to call up your 3 existing competitors and said, hey, how about we all lower our prices to the point of taking a loss, like a ridiculous price drop, for a couple of months. That way this new market entrant will go out of business, and then we can go back to business as usual. That is illegal and certainly unethical. That's not above board, right? So if that's something that you have to make a secret phone call about, yeah, it's probably unethical. You need to practice things above board, and collusion is actually illegal on top of that. Fraudulent accounting, a lot of the big corporate scandals that you hear about are a result of fraudulent accounting. For example, take a company like WorldCom. WorldCom, a few years ago, the CEO and some of the other executives, their pay was highly tied to the stock price of the company. So they essentially cooked the books. In other words, they manipulated the accounting numbers to make it seem like the company was wildly profitable when it was actually losing money hand over fist. So making it look highly profitable made the stock price go up, so they got huge annual bonuses on top of their salaries. Yeah, that's fraudulent accounting, and it's illegal. It's an SEC violation. So absolutely illegal, and a lot of them went to jail, just so you know. How about illegal yet ethical? These two items, by the way, on the right side, I left this in here because it's in your book, but providing lower prices to distributors in underserved areas, as long as it's not collusion, it is not illegal. Collaborating with other medical clinics to guarantee low prices in low-income countries. That is not necessarily collusion. If you're all agreeing, if you're collaborating to give to the poor, as long as you're not doing it to drive someone out of business. So that's kind of a sticky wicket there. Could be a little bit more, requires some legal proof. Overall, I think it's good to give to the poor. I think we could all agree with that, but you got to be careful that what you're doing is not collusion. All right. One of the ways that we can try to kind of make sense of the fact that, like, if it is true that so many of us have different views on what's right and what's wrong, then how in the world can we agree on a set of ethical standards? Well, I think we all do agree on some really basic ethical standards. So maybe that's a good place to start taking a look at this after the legality of it. For example, trustworthiness. Do you, as an individual employee, and does your company do what it says it is going to do? Can people trust what you say? It's being trustworthy, right? How about another one? Respect. I think we can all agree that that is something we all value as an ethical standard. How do you treat your employees? How do you treat your suppliers and partners? Right? Another one. Responsibility. Do you take responsibility when something goes wrong? For example, when you become a manager. If something goes wrong with your team and your boss is chewing you out, should you point the finger at one of your employees that made the mistake? Or should you step up and say, I'm in charge, it's my responsibility, I should have made sure that that got done correctly. My fault, I will fix it going forward. That is being responsible. That is an ethical response. Well, companies are no different, right? If one of their stores, for example, in a chain restaurant or something, let's say that one of their stores, the employees there do something highly unethical and it comes out in the press, the CEO of that company, even though those people were probably far removed from his personal purview, should take responsibility, apologize on his own behalf and on behalf of the entire company, and let people know what they're going to do to fix the problem and prevent it from happening in the future. That is being a good leader. That's being an ethical business. All right. How about fairness? That's kind of, we've already kind of talked about that, right? Applying rules and standards the same to everybody concerned. That's being fair. How about just ensuring that your customers are being treated in the way that you would want to be treated, right? Kind of that golden rule of business. We can all agree that that's being ethical. How about caring? Do you care about your employees and your customers as people, not just as employees or customers, right? In other words, you exercising some empathy. How about putting yourself in the other person's shoes for a moment, considering their perspective before you choose to take an action that's really going to upset them. Okay, it's just something to think about. For example, I mean, I've had employees that had some kind of issue that they're violating company policy. Like they were coming in late a couple times a week. They seemed like they were coming in late. And I'd, hey, mention it like, hey, you need to come in on time, or just pointing at my watch or something like that. And then instead of, when it happens again, instead of really coming down on them I'm talking about a good employee, how about instead of chewing them out, you first call them into your office so as not to embarrass them in front of others, ask them to shut the door so you can talk privately, and instead of starting in on them, why not make your first question, so, hey, what's going on? Why are you coming in late all the time? Or a couple of times a week? And it could turn out that they have a really legitimate reason for it. Well, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, my mother can't take the kids to school. I have to, and their school won't allow us to drop off kids before a certain time, and et cetera, et cetera. So you as a good manager, if you're really caring about them, you could say, well, hey, you know what? I get that. So what time, how soon can you be here on Tuesdays and Thursdays? Okay, well, how about you make that your start time and you just stay longer those 2 days? So you come in at 8:30 instead of 8, but you stay till 5:30 instead of 5 on those 2 days. That might be a good way to show some caring, right? Instead of getting too wrapped around the axle about company policies, just as a thought. Citizenship. Citizenship really kind of refers to doing more than you have to, doing more than is expected of you. For example, I talked about the fact that if you treat your employees really, really well, they are a lot more likely to exhibit citizenship behavior. That is, they are a lot more likely to do things for the company, for you, for the company, and for its customers that are above and beyond what they are required to do. So not only is that an ethical, do you want to create citizenship in your employees and to exhibit it yourself because it's the right thing to do, it typically comes back to the company in terms of better productivity. So something to think about. All right. So ethics not only impact the individual, but they also cumulatively impact the entire company. How do we develop our own personal set of ethics? Well, this definitely has to do with our own personality, that each of us are born with, but also by the way you're raised, by, the people that surrounded you while you grew up, the way your family acted, how they define, ethics, how their culture, their religion, a lot of different things impact how each of us see ethics. I thought this was interesting. So business leaders who exercise empathy talked about, putting yourself in the shoes of another person as a way to exhibit caring, as an ethical way to act. Empathy is essentially doing that. So this study says that leaders who act with score very high on empathy in survey instruments tend to exhibit very ethical leadership. So it follows then, if you yourself want to be a highly ethical leader, one of the things you can do right now is start trying to exercise personal empathy with the people that you deal with. It doesn't have to be your subordinates. It could be with your boss, giving your boss or cutting them a break sometimes. It could be with a customer. Maybe a customer is, you're handling a customer service call and you've got a customer that is just ripping you a new one. because they are ranting. They've had such a bad experience with your company's product or service or what have you. Instead of yelling at them over the phone, yelling back at them, maybe you let them kind of get it all out. And even if you don't feel like the company is in the wrong, you could say something like, "I am so sorry that you're dealing with that." And then try to calmly, try to put yourself in their shoes, understand what's happened to them, and then try to work out a solution. So leaders don't have to be the people in charge. Anyone can practice personal empathy as a way to start becoming that ethical leader. Then, of course, the organization itself has an influence over the ethical conduct of its employees. The interaction between the organization's ethical choices are extremely intertwined in how individual employees tend to act. So if the company makes really questionable ethical policies and procedures, they have very questionable ways of filing their financial records. All of those things typically kind of trickle down into the ranks of the employees, and it becomes a self-eating monster, right? So extremely important, especially as you move up the food chain within an organization. You need to keep that in mind. As you're developing, making company-wide decisions about the direction the company's going, policies and procedures, understand that the more ethical you are in those decisions, the more ethical the employees below you are likely to act on the company's behalf. And again, companies that act ethically, more ethically, long term anyway, typically do better financially than companies who do not. Now, yes, there are times when remember, one of the things we talked about in chapter 1, by the way, was the fact that more and more companies are learning that this is the age of building those long-term relationships with customers. So another thing to keep in mind, by the way, occasionally you might make a decision that doesn't really benefit your organization or your company in that one particular instance. But if you do something that builds a relationship with a customer, they're going to keep coming back. They're going to become more loyal to your organization. So again, I would add to this to think long term about some of your decisions. So how do you know whether you have a strong culture or not? One of the things I ask my students is about any company that they currently work for, if they would consider their company ethical or not, and ask them to give me some examples. And it's always interesting to hear a lot of my students have very low-level jobs, some of them minimum wage jobs, and they feel like their company is just home the moon, and they get minimum wage. They think they're still extremely ethical because they're treated with respect. Their boss is trustworthy, does what they say they're going to do. They feel like their company and their boss are fair. In other words, they apply the rules equally to themselves and to others. They lead by example. They go above and beyond for not only their customers, but for them as employees. So again, you don't have to make a lot of money to be or pay a lot of money to be considered ethical. I'm going to just kind of throw that out. But when ethics-related actions are displayed at all levels of an organization, that's really a good measuring stick to know whether your company as a whole has a strongly ethical culture. By the way, how do you build an ethical culture? You reward the behavior you want, and you discourage or punish the behavior you do not want. That is not in your book. Just wanted to throw that out to you. Because you as an employee or as a leader, something to keep in mind. You don't have to be in charge for this to just influence culture within your work team, for example. If let's say you've got a coworker or even your boss who does something that is a little bit iffy, a little bit unethical, and they brag or joke about it. Well, you could discourage it. You couldn't punish it, but you could discourage it by kind of shaking your head like, I don't know if that's right. I think that, I would appreciate it if a company I was dealing with did this and that and not what you just did. I don't know. That's just me. You could do it in a nice way. But that would be one way that you could have an impact on the ethical culture of your work team or even on your boss. So when you do become a manager or even more so if you own a business, you've got to think about being very, very consistent in what you reward and what you discourage, and also be aware of the ways that you encourage or discourage behavior without even thinking about it. So building a culture, you're essentially rewarding what you want, discouraging or punishing what you don't want. One of the things the book does mention, very good on them for doing so. You've got to back up ethical words with documented practices. That means your processes, your procedures, your standard operating procedures, your employee handbook, your contracts. All of those things have to be ethical. And so it takes a lot of knowledge and expertise to help and experience to kind of figure out if the way that you do business as a rule is itself ethical. And we'll talk about some of the ways to kind of do a check on that a little bit later. All right, so a code of ethics. So if you were to kind of codify, your next buzzword for the day, in other words, make something official, put it in writing, codify, a code of ethics, into a formal document. That is usually called a code of ethics. You can in fact, you can do a Google search right now on any major company in the United States. Use the name of their company and the word code of ethics. You will likely find their code of ethics on their website. It essentially gives employees information about how to make ethical decisions across a range of situations that they are likely to encounter over the course of doing their particular job. That's extremely important, because if you just say this is kind of the way we think about the world, that's all great, puppies and rainbows, that's super, but it doesn't really become meaningful usually until you really start making it specific to the way that you actually do business. So, for example, even as a middle level manager, I was managing about 40 people in my last position. Every time I did a performance review document at the beginning of a review period, one of the things I would do is I would define ethics, our company code of ethics, in terms of how our employees did business, like in our department, on our team. I would give them specific examples of how to exhibit ethical behavior based on what we did in our team, so that everybody had a really good understanding of what our code of ethics meant as a team. I'd also put it in terms of our company values. I would define those company values and give them examples of what it means to exhibit those values in the course of doing their job as a member of our team. It made it a lot more meaningful. And then at the end of the reporting period, I would refer to some of those things in my write-up. So it's another way to kind of enforce ethics, that you expect ethical behavior throughout the course of the year. By the way, if one of your employees violates code of ethics, you need to write them up using verbiage from the company's code of ethics and or in terms of the company's values, because that helps reinforce that culture, that ethical culture you're trying to create as a business professional. All right. So how do you make a code of ethics? I mean, it sounds like a pretty daunting thing. Well, you can start off by getting executive buy-in. In fact, I would mention that probably a good idea to take a look at the code of ethics for a number of other companies that are similar to yours to get a feel for what you're getting into. But then, yes, by all means, get executive buy-in. We talked about the fact that leaders in the company have to act in an ethical manner. So they need to have buy-in, complete buy-in, and an absolute commitment to follow through on these codes of ethics for it to be meaningful in any way. The other one is just to establish expectations for ethical behavior. But again, you have to make it specific to individual people. Therefore, these ethical expectations that you're codifying have to be specific to all the different levels of the organization. And in fact, if you have different divisions of the company that do completely different things, the code of ethics you might share a basic code of ethics. There's going to be a lot of things that are specific to the entire company, and that's great. But to make it meaningful, I would make it a little bit more specific at each of those different divisions and at different levels of the organization to make sure it becomes meaningful. So all of these ethics don't mean anything if you simply put them in a framed picture on the wall at the company headquarters, or simply make them a hidden page somewhere on your company website. That is of no use whatsoever. It has to start with your onboarding process, that initial training you get when you first start at a company. So it starts with your onboarding training, and then there has to be regular staff training on it. So once a year, maybe some kind of annual training it would be a part of, but also maybe you'd start off each of your meetings by just kind of rolling through the company values, or showing the mission, vision, and values. Maybe the next time you mention a couple of scenarios with the code of ethics. Give them some examples. Just make sure that it's on everybody's mind, and give some maybe it's a great opportunity to give some shout outs to employees that are in the room that have exhibited highly ethical behavior as a means to kind of encourage ethical behavior, because you're seeing someone get praised for being ethical. That's a great way to encourage ethical behavior. All right. And yet another way is to make sure that it's global in scope. What we mean there is the fact that for different cultures, different parts of the world, there are different expectations, there are different norms for what is and is not ethical. Okay? So if something may be completely unethical in our country, say make a code of ethics, can you simply translate that into a foreign language for one of your divisions in another country? Not necessarily. It may involve a lot of training on their side to make them understand why we feel it is unethical and why that they will be held to that particular ethical standard. Kind of the reverse could be true too, though. Just because we think something is ethical, if it's considered highly unethical in their country, well, you might need to redefine your code of ethics for that location in an effort to be respectful of their cultural norms in that country. Okay? All right. It's kind of building on that. So build and maintain clear and trusting reporting structures. So everybody's got to have the opportunity to be able to report violations of the ethical code of conduct. In other words, you should always use your chain of command, by the way, whenever you can. In other words, your chain of command means you should go to your boss. You should never go over your boss's head to their boss with an issue. I would always give my boss at least the opportunity to handle an issue before I went to their boss. So keep that in mind. But you've got to have a reporting structure of some kind for ethical concerns and violations. But what if it is your boss who you think is acting unethical? Well, okay. You've got to have some kind of structure in place. Maybe it is a 1-800 line that employees can anonymously report violations. That might be a good way to do it. Some companies have an outside website that is not tracked, where people can anonymously report things. That might be another way to go. Establish protection for whistleblowers. Employees have to absolutely be sure that it's not going to come back on them if they're just trying to do the right thing. And then, of course, you have to enforce the code of ethics, and you have to do so fairly. Doesn't matter who violates the code of ethics. You have to enforce it uniformly, or people will figure out very quickly that they don't have to follow the rules because no one really cares. All right. At this point in my in-person classes, I typically do some scenarios in class that ask students whether or not certain situations are ethical or not. We usually have a lot of fun with this. But essentially, what we're looking for here is just the fact that it's really easy to rationalize ethical situations and say, well, it depends on the situation. The only problem with that is you've got to consider the fact that it's not your company, that your decisions impact others. How does it impact others? There's lots of ways to frame things to really kind of start drilling down if something's ethical or not. For example, let me give you one of these cases that we cover in the in-person class. I like this one. All right. So Emily works in quality control. Once a year, her supervisor gives away the company's refurbished computers to the local elementary school. No specific records are kept of this type of transaction, and Emily really needs a computer for her son, who is in college. Her supervisor has asked her to deliver 12 computers to the school. Now, in the situation, the question is, so is it okay or not for Emily to take one of those computers, since they're giving them away anyway? And they don't really keep records, so would it be okay for old Emily to only deliver 11 of those computers to the school and keep one for her son, who is also a student, right? So you can kind of see the way you can kind of see if you rationalize this, but that it would be okay. But the question I would pose is, what was the intent? The intent is to help out the school, right? So some of my students will say, well, she should ask her boss, her supervisor. She should ask her supervisor if it's okay to keep one for her son. To which I would say, is it up to her supervisor to even make that decision? How big of a company is it? Where is her supervisor in the hierarchy? Is it up to them to decide that she can take something that was designed for charity? So again, it'd be easy to rationalize a lot of different situations. Here are some ways that might help with that, right? First of all, decide what the ethical issue is. In this little scenario, what's the ethical issue? Is it stealing to take one of these computers? List the facts that have the most bearing on the case. What is the company's intent? Is to donate it to the school, to charity. They don't keep records. A lot of different things. Who's going to be affected by their decision? by Emily's decision, well, the company wouldn't really be affected by it. Her son, the school, because the school wouldn't have to buy as many computers, the school's students, because they get computers out of it. So those are the people that might be affected by it. Might be a few more. Explain what each person affected would want you to do. Well, if the intent is really to give to charity and to help kids in the school district at a particular school, then how are they affected? Well, they don't get computers, and or the school system has to spend their own budget, so that takes resources away from other areas of the school. What could she do? So just kind of running like what are the things that could be done? Who would be harmed by the choice? And determine any values that would be compromised by selecting that alternative. And then determine if there are any automatic reasons why any of the alternatives should not be selected, like one is illegal. I think if we really look at it that way, Emily should just probably take the computers to the school as the company intended and donate it to the people that they were intended for. All right. Let's take a look at the spectrum of what social responsibility is. First of all, what is social responsibility? Social responsibility is the obligation of business to contribute to society. Okay? So, taking a look at businesses, they really approach their approaches to giving back, to serving or contributing to society, kind of run a pretty big spectrum, from just a little bit to really seeking out opportunities to give back. So no contribution at all, is that allowed? Sure, absolutely. It's not compulsory. It's not a law that you have to give back to societies. And so, yeah, there are some businesses who just don't. It's not really in their purview. They think, oh, I'm barely keeping my head above water. I can't help anybody else. I gotta look out for myself right now. I'll do that later. Again, I think if you really think about it, there are ways to give that don't cost any money at all. Then there are the companies who, yeah, okay, so case by case, if I am really nailed down, I specifically asked to do a specific thing now and then okay, yeah, I'll do it, and then I'll put it on my website, make a big deal out of it to make my company look good, look like a caring, ethical company. Then there are others who are what we call proactive contributors. They really seek out. It is part of their way of doing business. It's part of their business plan. It's part of their business process that one of the things they do is they seek out opportunities in their strategic planning to contribute as part of their business goals. Okay? So, again, I would ask you, that's on a company level, but also on an individual level. Think about the kind of person that you want to be. Think about whether you want to be, not really think about ethics, hey, as long as I don't break the law, I'm good to go. Or are you going to be the kind of person that's like, you know what, I want to help out other people. What can I do to give back? And just make that a part of your personal plan for the year. Just throwing that out. All right. Social responsibility to stakeholders. First of all, I want you to understand what a stakeholder is. That's your next buzzword for the day. Buzzwords or stakeholders essentially are anyone who has a stake in the performance or actions of an organization. Like for a business, who is impacted by that business? Well, it's employees, obviously. So you want the company to do well so that everybody continues to have a job and they can support their families. The customers, obviously. If you want to be socially responsible to your customers, you deliver value by producing high quality products at a given price point. the investors, yes, as a business, you have a fiduciary duty, your next buzzword for the day, to meet legal requirements, to be honest, and to spend and make, I would add, and make money wisely. Investors in a company, you have a responsibility to them too. They gave you money to make money. So you have a fiduciary duty to make money for them. So yes, there are going to be times where there is an iffy ethical situation and you get to decide whether to err on the side of your fiduciary duty or on the side of what you feel is doing the right thing. Sometimes that is, I will warn you, that is often a very gray area. You'll have to decide what you want to do when that time comes. The community. Obviously, the community is impacted by the operation of a business and the environment. We all know it is considered socially responsible to protect not only the environment now, but to do proactive things to safeguard its future. More and more people are expecting businesses to act in a socially responsible way with regards to the environment. All right, and obviously one of the things we talked about a few minutes ago is the fact that companies should adhere to legal requirements. That's a really good starting place, right? You've got to follow the law, even if you disagree with the law. Maybe a better thing to do if you disagree with the law is to fight to change it. Vote for candidates who vow to change it. That would be an ethical way to deal with something like that. But overall, I think most laws are designed so that in order to support ethical behavior and socially responsible behavior. So as a whole, the law is usually a good thing, and it's something that you should always follow. Always follow the law. Sarbanes-Oxley is a good example. It sets higher ethical standards for public corporations and accounting firms. So it has provisions that limit conflict of interest issues, and it requires financial officers and CEOs to certify the validity of financial statements. In other words, it forces them by signing to say, I am taking responsibility for these financial statements. There will be none of this, oh, I didn't know, later when it's determined that it was completely fabricated. Like, you signed off on these. It means you are going to jail. Okay, so. How about social responsibility to the community? More and more people expect their businesses that they deal with to contribute to the community. So donations, corporate philanthropy is actual business donations, nonprofit groups, like giving money. Another way to contribute, and by the way, it can also serve a purpose for the company. It can be a win-win situation. For example, take the MDA Walk. It's going on next month here in Waco, Texas, or the Walk for the Homeless that's going on this month. At each of those events, I assure you, there will be corporate sponsors who donated money for it. Maybe they're donating water for the participants or something like that. I assure you they will probably have a banner or a sign or a booth or something, or perhaps their logo printed on the items that they're giving out as a way to, yes, contribute, donate, but they're also getting some good PR out of it. Cause-related marketing. And I'll show you an example of that in the next slide too. We get to green marketing. Corporate responsibility, on the other hand, is different, a little bit differently. It's a little bit different from corporate philanthropy, right? That relates to how the business does business itself, rather than just donations of money or time. So make sure you know that for the test, by the way. Difference between corporate philanthropy and corporate responsibility. A little bit different. All right, so responsibility to the environment. Absolutely, we all agree that that's an ethical thing to do, that a socially responsible thing to do is to take care of the planet. But you know what? A lot of businesses use green marketing simply to get us all to think that they're a caring business, and we all want to do business with caring companies, so we give them more business. So I'm not saying that it's not sincere. Sometimes it may be. Other times it's simply a marketing gimmick. I'll give you some examples there on the slide. But sustainable development is really not that. It's actually doing business in a way that protects, not only is responsible for the current situation, but also something that is proactive. You're trying to do something that will protect the environment going forward. For example, lumber companies here in America, for every tree they cut down, they don't just plant one tree. They typically will plant half a dozen for every one tree that they cut down. That is a very sustainable way of, doing business in that environment. So, all right. How about social responsibility on kind of in a global way? The reason we mention this is simply because these are challenges that are faced by companies all the time as we become, as we have advances in technology and transportation, we're becoming a much smaller world. We're much more connected. Well, as we become more connected, we often find that, what is unacceptable here is completely normal and accepted in other parts of the world. Bribery is a big one. In a lot of countries, government officials fully expect to be bribed. They expect to get a payoff of some kind in order to process the paperwork that people or companies are coming to them with. They think it's perfectly okay. Now, people in that country might accept it as, well, that's just normal. Of course. You have to pay people off. I will tell you that is one of the laws that is illegal for U.S. companies to engage in, even though it is taking place in another country. You can actually somebody in jail can go to jail here for their company doing that abroad. So I think we can all agree that's not above board. That is not ethical. Something also to look for, though, as I mentioned this, you really got to start take a look at the fact that you're not only responsible for the way you treat your stakeholders, but you should also consider demanding that any suppliers or partners you do business with does the same thing. That's one way to operationalize that, right? So you could even codify this into a vendor or supplier code of conduct. Because if you think about it, if you do business with a supplier or partner who is acting in an unethical way, are you not profiting by unethical actions yourself? You're complicit. So something to think about. Maybe looking at your suppliers and partners and make sure that they're acting in a moral and ethical way. They're being socially responsible before you'll do business with them. Probably a pretty good practice. All right. So how do you know if you're being socially responsible or not? Well, a lot of companies conduct what's called a social audit. So it's just a really systematic way to internally check periodically to make sure you're meeting your own ethical and social responsibility goals. So again, I mentioned earlier, as part of your planning process, proactive companies who are really seeking to kind of raise the bar for ethics and social responsibility in the way that they conduct business, and I hope that you all think about doing that. One way to do it is to set some goals. Like make it a part of your actual business planning, is that your social responsibility and ethics are part of that. So that would mean you need to set goals and you need to measure how well you're doing towards those goals. And this shouldn't be just something you look at during each annual strategic planning session. This should be something that you are monitoring, that you assign champions for, and those champions have to, as part of like management staff, monthly staff meetings or weekly staff meetings, they need to report on those things on a regular basis. So one way to look at that is kind of using what is called a double bottom line. So again, absolutely there's a financial aspect of this, right? And it's like we talked about in chapter 1. Profit is a good thing. Profit is a necessary thing. Profit is what keeps a business going. It allows businesses to hire employees. It allows businesses to allow people to support their families, on and on. Absolutely. Profit is a good thing. It's not a bad word. But you should probably have a double bottom line, meaning you should balance that financial aspect with other ways, with the other side of it, that is being socially responsible. All right, so why would a company choose to kind of monitor themselves? Why would they not just follow the law? If you follow the law, everything will be fine. Well, it's not necessarily true, because we've already established the fact that sometimes something is legal, but it is really unethical, right? Remember in chapter 2 when we talked about one of the earlier chapters, there was 1 or 2, we talked about the financial crisis. We talked about the fact that laws hadn't caught up to the new financial products quite yet with regards to home loans. Remember those banks were kind of under some pressure to make some of those bad loans to people, but then instead of exercising prudence and making good above board loans, they were making bad loans with the whole intent of pushing those loans off to other people, selling those loans to other people without any regard for how it was going to turn out for them, because they knew that there were bad loans. So it wasn't technically illegal at that time, but it's definitely unethical, right? And we saw how it turned out for them. All right, so another reason that a company would want to self-regulate, meaning go beyond and above and beyond what the law requires, is because people are watching. Like activist customers is a good example. Investors, unions, environmentalists, community groups, they keep a close watch on corporations and their social responsibilities. Ticking off any one of these groups can have some really serious negative effects on the financial health of a company. So, and of course, the threat of government legislation also motivates companies to try to regulate themselves as well, because hey, if there's a public outcry over something that businesses are regularly doing, you can bet a law is coming. So yet another thing to think about. All right, essentially that is chapter 4. We talked about ethics, universal ethical standards, gave you some scenarios in business ethics. We talked a little bit about ethical dilemmas, developing a code of conduct, needing to include processes for whistleblowers, being socially responsible, and giving back to the community. We framed those in terms of a variety of different stakeholders that you need to think about their needs in the way that you do business. Planned obsolescence and consumerism. We talked a little bit about the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that holds people's feet to the fire. We talked about corporate philanthropy versus social responsibility. Make sure you remember the difference there. Cause-related marketing, corporate responsibility, sustainable development. We Some of these we didn't particularly talk about in this, but make sure you're getting all of these. I think we all know what a carbon footprint is. Green marketing, social audits. So remember, start deciding now what kind of business professional you want to be. Think about the other people that are impacted by your decisions. And I encourage you to raise the moral and ethical bar for yourself and then try to influence your company to do the same thing. All right, if you enjoyed chapter 4, make sure you are studying as you go.